Working or aiming towards full agile delivery. We're trying to do DevOps. Previous to that, I've worked in startup environments, in commercial off-the-shelf global software houses, and for a short time in a finance house as well. And the theme, I guess, of my career arc has mainly been around delivering service into development teams. So not necessarily delivering products, although I have had some experience of that, but there's a lot of it has been about delivering the underpinnings that enable agile teams or software delivery teams to actually get their stuff out to customers in whichever format the team might be working in. The other thing as well, I'm not professing to be any kind of expert in any of this. I'm very much an observer. You know, I'm not a management consultant. I'm not touting for business to come and tell you how to revolutionise your own business. I'm very much looking at this very much from my own experience. So I hope you find it interesting. So the main thing I've sort of tried to structure my talk around this evening is just around Conways Law, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's been around for quite a long time, and it's about the idea that so the way that we communicate within our software development teams and the way that we're organised, which obviously is based on how our teams are structured, will have an impact on the way the software is architected. The line I want to take this evening as well is more about how teams actually go about delivering things, not necessarily about how the stuff's built and put together, but how teams actually go about building stuff and making things happen. So my first role, 15 odd years ago, I worked in a startup which was operating in the digital rights management space. It was quite revolutionary at the time, really, because it was operating as a software as a service at a time when people weren't really doing software as a service. It was quite revolutionary, and we had all kinds of challenges going out talking to our customers, trying to convince them that SaaS was a real thing that they could do. It was a small team. We had one manager running the entire team, but it was very diverse. We had people working on Windows, Macs, delivering server software, client software, software that was built around the server, and then poor old me, who was responsible in the middle of this, trying to get build scripts and installers put together and delivered out to customers. So there was a lot going on, but I was very much working on my own. Another thing about this was quite revolutionary, I think, at the time, thinking back now to where we all are with Agile, is that when I joined, there was no test resource. The developers were actually having to do all of their own tests, so they got quite creative about it, and they built their own automation frameworks, which at the time was really quite cutting edge. The software that was being built, there was a little bit of coupling between the applications and the installers, which I think was just an evolutionary thing because the company was still quite small, and the people who'd been responsible for the delivery were also people on the applications build side. One element that caused me a lot of pain personally was the build failures. It was a long build. It was one great big thing, big ball of mud, and it was always failing because there was a lot of coupling between server code and client code and the dependencies between them. Now you would think that where you've got a team working quite closely together and they're all causing one another pain, that they would work quite hard to get all of that sorted out. But that didn't really happen. And I'm not quite sure, thinking about this, I almost wonder whether there wasn't enough of tribalism between the two areas of the business where there were two managers fighting over one another saying, your team are causing my team pain. So because it was quite a small team and they were all collaborating quite closely and there was lots of high bandwidth communications there, they almost weren't taking it to the next stage and sorting those problems out. From a personal perspective, I was feeling very isolated, which was one of the things that contributed to my moving away from the company, was I found it very difficult to innovate where I was on my own and I didn't really have anybody like-minded that I could bounce any ideas off. So that was one thing about working there that really made me want to move on and move somewhere bigger, which I did. So the next stage in my career, I was in Symantec, which was a big change, big global team. We were delivering a big client-server product, enterprise-level software, big differentiated global team in the UK, in India. We even had a presence for a while in the US, with lots of different moving parts within the platform, clients, server agents, build and installation team, lots of QA engineers, localization. And when I joined there, it was very waterfall. Lots of process documentation, loads and loads of planning, loads of replanning when things didn't go quite right, and lots of manual QA that meant that the delivery cycles, you'd have a 3-month regression cycle at the end of a product release, and loads of panics around, well, we can't fix this bug because we've already done the regression testing for that area and maybe we'll have to patch it. And so it was very difficult to get things out the door. Another pain point for me was around the build process. So another big, long, involved build, 4 hours from doing a source fetch all the way through to getting the DVDs out at the end of the build, with an overnight build process that was constantly failing. We had to put loads of fixes in there, basically doing daytime builds, again introducing some of the more agile practices into the way that we're doing things to make sure that we have problems in the daytime, not the night time. And a big monolithic installer, which again was a delivery package had grown because originally there was only one person working on it. So it was much easier to just add a little bit here and add a little bit there, and we ended up with this another great big ball of mud. From an engineering standpoint, there was no separate team looking after engineering BAU, servicing the needs of the customers who'd already bought the products and were trying to operate it. There was a rotation system, so developers would be hauled off their projects and put into a separate team that was servicing customers, and they hated it, they didn't like it, because they were pulled off the project that they'd just been working on, and they were just fixing bugs which they weren't really very interested in. So this is how it felt for me in this team. It just got loads and loads of requests coming in. Very, very difficult to plan. Again, because we were a small team, very difficult to plan and prioritise. So we moved from Waterfall into Agile. So one of the things within the team, as it grew, we realised, it sort of happened organically really, that rather than everybody being an expert within the same area, we started to diversify. We started to play towards different people's strengths. So we had 1 or 2 people looking after build, 1 or 2 people looking after specific installers, really, but not to the detriment of their overall contribution to the team. So one of the nice things about the way this team in particular was structured was around the processes that they had in place were really about fostering communications within the team. So as part of your check-in process, there was quite rigorous peer review, both in terms of making sure that you demoed what you were building to the QA team, so that they knew what they were going to be testing, and that it worked on your machine before it got checked in, but also quite rigorous code review processes as well. So we were fostering those comms between different members of the teams to make sure that everybody was aware of what was going on. So the ball of mud problem we had with the big fat installer, we tackled by breaking things down. We couldn't break it down, but when we had new things coming along, instead of just piling more and more stuff in, we started to build smaller pieces and modules that we could put in there, so that we just avoided making things worse. The other thing we were able to do was to push out to the engineering teams and actually get more support from them. So they were building out the components that we were integrating into the installers, rather than us having to take ownership of the whole thing and just struggle to keep up with the work that was coming in. And then the other thing that was quite revolutionary was around the structure of the team that was responsible for doing customer-facing engineering. So they constituted a whole separate team, rather than it being this thing that was just pulled out for people that didn't want to be there. They built a whole new team that was responsible for dealing with the support organisation and fielding all of those problems. So they started building a real relationship with their customer. The reason they had to do this was because there was a historical accident where a couple of people within support promised features to a customer that then never got delivered, and there was a decision from the management that no, support must never talk to engineering in case they go promising things that can't be delivered. So they actually had to break those walls down, and what we ended up with really was a team that became much more focused on delivering customer value, because they were much closer to what the customer was actually wanting, rather than previously it being very much a product management driven organisation where it was all about realising new license revenue for new shiny features, rather than actually looking at what customers actually wanted, what they needed, and delighting them. So after a few years there, I moved on to L&G in their internal IT organisation, which is another new area I've never really worked in before. They had a dev and QA team, again spread across different geographies. So they had a support team in India. We were in the UK, in both London and in Essex, which had comms challenges all of its own. And I was heading up a configuration management team, looking after the build pipelines and releases into development, but interestingly, not into any of the test environments, into production environments. The reason why that was done like that, I guess, was just, again, structurally, the team for development was very, very separate and isolated from the production teams, even to the operations teams, even to the extent that the production and the test teams were really quite separate organisations. So trying to get anything DevOpsy integrated into an environment like that was going to be a real challenge. But we did what we could. So that was basically the working environment. I'm sure you've seen something like that before. So we had quite poor alignment between the dev processes, the release processes, and the processes that the ops teams were using. We had different release automation tools. We were using Jenkins. They were using SCCM to get their stuff out to live. Lots of different ways of automating things, which meant it was quite difficult to predict how things were going to behave once they'd left the development teams. One way around that was we tried to isolate all of the installation and deployment logic into shrink-wrap packages, which we knew we could test reliably within development, and we could hand over the fence to the ops teams with a high degree of reliability. But we still had the JFDIs coming in, do this now, we need this yesterday, and we had to work very hard to avoid the temptation to copy and paste code and just change a few lines. Is a real challenge for us to avoid that and push back. So, as I say, about a year ago, I joined Sainsbury's, big retailer, a big organisation with a lot of IT history, a very, very strongly ITIL-driven organisation, lots of process around change, and Sainsbury's had made a decision about 2 years ago to start bringing all of their IT in-house. They realised that they can't meet the needs of their customer, they can't meet the needs of their supply chain, if they're going out to tender and taking 2 years just to decide what the heck it is they want to build, and then another 18 months to actually get it delivered, by which time customers have moved on to either another supermarket, or they're now using handhelds, they're not using websites anymore. So the only way to do that is to actually bring the engineering capability in-house, which they've done very successfully. One of the more challenging areas that we found is actually finding infrastructure developers, DevOps people who've actually got the skills that we can bring in to support the engineering teams in what they're trying to achieve. Which is the two pizza teams. Typically, we land where we can, one, sometimes two infrastructure developers into those teams to help them get their environment set up and so forth. Sometimes we just don't have the people to do it. The other thing that we've had is a very fast evolving cloud strategy. So a year ago, we weren't even sure what platforms we were going to be delivering into. We were going to use our own internal private cloud, we were going to go with AWS. Now we've made that decision. Things are much easier to get moving because we've got some ability to standardise on what we're delivering on. So structurally within the team, we've got far more development teams than we have individual resources able to support. So we've got real scalability problems. We've had challenges around getting team leads in to manage the staff that are working in there. So we've had quite a thin management layer, very much operating on a hub and spoke model without a huge amount of supervision, unfortunately. And that's meant that the guys who are working, delivering into the engineering teams have been quite isolated from one another. It's been difficult to foster the cross-team communications to enable people to say, well, hang on a minute, I just built one of those, why don't you have this? Or we're not using that, we're using this. It's harder when you structure your teams in such a way that it isolates people from one another. And the other problem as well that we found is it's because people are going into those teams and there hasn't been a huge amount of reusable stuff, it's been taking a long time to get stuff delivered, pretty much building everything from scratch, which isn't a great situation to be in. So keep calm and don't repeat yourself. It's an engineering mantra, and we have been doing a bit of it, I have to say. But it's very difficult looking. It's easy to look back now with hindsight and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You should have done something differently. But the fact is that we've been challenged to get stuff out there, and we've done that. But now maybe is the time to start reflecting and thinking about how we've got here, or what's got us here isn't necessarily what's going to get us over there. So we're doing some more reorganisation. We've got a specific team that we've built inside engineering to help us think about how we're delivering on cloud, how to help us to mature our processes, to start building out reusable infrastructure patterns, reusable architectures, and make sure that, because if we start doing things in a standardised way, it means when we go out to our InfoSec partners, they can say, oh, it's one of those, yeah, sign that off, rather than every single time having a slightly different architecture with slightly different moving parts in. But even with that oversight from the Cloud Competency Centre, we're still left at the moment with that challenge around how do we stop our people getting too isolated in what they're doing. So, observations on all of this. So it's really easy when you're working on your own to just build those monoliths, to build those balls of mud, because you haven't got that challenge of somebody sitting next to you saying, well, hang on a minute, I want to work on this as well. And because of the way this is all put together, it's really hard for us to collaborate. And certainly some of the tooling that we've worked with in the past has really made that quite hard. When you've got the bigger teams, you've got the opportunities for oversight and scrutiny. And collaboration means it kind of forces you into breaking things down and working on, having 2 or 3 people working on different elements of a system at the same time. I think the other area that I've seen as well that's worked is just allowing people to specialise and differentiate themselves and really focus on the things that really work for them. I think when you take that, I'm hoping what we'll be able to do when we take this to the next level is to actually start building out within our DevOps team, and very much at the moment they're all kind of, I guess for want of a better word, you talk about full stack engineers, we might be talking about full stack DevOps, people who can do the whole thing. Might be a better way forward for us to actually, as we build the team, to start looking at, well, who are the people that have got, you know, the Terraform skills? Who are the people that really know Sensor? Who are the people that are really great at doing the pipelines? Who are the people that have got the overall vision? And allowing people to develop themselves within that, rather than trying to hire the kind of, this person can sort of be a polymath, because I think there's a danger of us missing out on certain really talented individuals because they're not necessarily as rounded as we needed when we were first building it out. So what next? We are starting now to look at platform delivery in a more structured way. So rather than doing the whole, you go in there and you do all the stuff for that team, actually going out and thinking, how can we build reusable components that we can take out to a team and say, right, we're going to put 3 people in here, you might have them for 2 weeks, and at the end of that, the aim is you'll have everything you need, it's over to you, you can operate this platform. And that's really where we're trying to get to. We have experimented internally with guilds, which I know in some organisations have worked quite well, but they're very informal. And I think without a certain amount of management support and formality around them, it's very difficult to keep those things going. So that's me done with. I'm not quite sure how we're doing for time, but if we're okay for questions, I'm fine to say some questions.
Yeah, 5 minutes of questions if you want.
How did you approach the business and started the DevOps? How did you convince them that that's the way to go?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I think within the internal comms in Sainsbury's, we talk about agile transformation. We really haven't transformed very much, because what we've actually done is taken in a new engineering organisation which really didn't exist before. We've just bolted that on. So in some ways, looking at what we are is we're almost like a vendor, but we're now part of Sainsbury's. So we're delivering in the way that we would if we were a vendor, but we haven't got all of the contractual gubbins that you have to go through when you're going out to the Accentures and the Salmons of this world. But we are also transforming slowly but surely, because the internal stakeholders who are so used to going out to a vendor and saying, "Oh, we need one of these. Who do I talk to get this done?" It's been difficult for them to really understand how our processes work. So as we said earlier on, we're being engaged and told, well, when can I have this? How can I do this? And going back to them and saying, well, you don't necessarily know what you want, and we don't necessarily know how quickly we'll be able to deliver it, because you actually need to be part of this whole process of working out what you want. You can actually come in and you can have a rough idea of the kind of thing you're trying to deliver, but you don't necessarily have to come with a full spec. And there's been a real job of work convincing the stakeholders within the business that they actually need to interact with us quite differently.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Any more? Yeah.
I've got an observation. On one of the slides you said about just having one in for a dev per team gives you a lone coder problem.
Yeah.
Have you tried to do some kind of rotation? So like one day a week you have to pair program another team?
These are the things that we need to start considering, yeah. Because it's not good for the people who are on the teams as well to feel isolated. But I think, as I say, we've got to where we are now, but now the organisations, we were, when I joined a year ago, we just didn't have enough people to even be able to do rotations.
Right.
But it's definitely now a point in time, I think.
But something like a round robin for programming things, because each individual goes and works in every other team.
Yeah. It's definitely something we need to consider, because I think there are other elements of that down the line really start to harm you as well, because if you've only got one person that knows that particular project, how do you support it? You can't get somebody on call 24/7 for the rest of their life at the company. You need to be able to share that knowledge, and having different ways of getting people to know the project means that you're sparing people that pain of doing too much support work. Oh, yeah, we're here.
How do you differentiate basically between an agile team and a DevOps team? Can you tell some sort of difference?
Well, this is an interesting one actually, because we had a lot of conversations internally around the use of the word DevOps, and I think I wouldn't say it got a bad press, but there was a lot of misunderstanding around what DevOps was supposed to be within the Sainsbury's world. We felt very much it's a cultural thing, underpinned. There's practices, there's techniques that we use, but it's not a job title. It's something that really goes all the way through from people who are building the infrastructure, the developers who are operating the platform that they've built, all the way through to you might even get as far as the software architects have got to have a DevOps hat on, because they're building stuff that you have to, there's no point designing an application if you can't do frequent daily releases or hourly releases into it because of the way that it's been put together. So I don't really see, so one of the things we found about that was we just got rid of DevOps. What we've replaced it with probably is not ideal. We talk about infrastructure developers, but again, it's not perfect, but at least it gets away from us being on the hook to be the team that does the DevOps, because we're not. It has to be the whole organisation. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Sorry, what was the question here?
Yeah, it was just as an observation, because you said the rotation of the people. What we did in the company where I was working before was to make the team accountable for what they were delivering.
Yeah.
And obviously this helps, on making everyone accountable and knowledgeable of what they're doing.
I think the accountability thing there is crucial. And in fact, I was in a meeting today to discuss exactly that, because we're still some of the finer points around even just things like getting developers on rotas, which is a bit of a new thing certainly within the Sainsbury's world. It's definitely something we've got to start now. But as I say, I'm no expert. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody who's got experience of this and things that they've tried. Please do fire your ideas at me, because I'm very keen to learn this myself. Okay, I think the time's up. Time to move on. Thank you very much.